Welcome to Moments with Marianne. This is your host, Marianne Pastana. We're here today with special guests, Michelle Cassandra Johnson and Amy Burtaine, and they're here to share with us their new book, The Wisdom of the Hive, What Honeybees Can Teach Us About Collective Wellbeing. So do honeybees hold the keys to healing our trauma, deepening our relationships, and restoring balance with the world around us? Well, today's guests are here to share with us just that. Michelle Cassandra Johnson is an author, activist, spiritual teacher, racial equality consultant, and intuitive healer. She teaches workshops and leads retreats and transformative experiences nationwide. Amy Burtaine is a leadership coach and racial equality trainer. Her trainings for meaningful social change include work for Google, the DNC, and the ACLU. So welcome to the show, Michelle Cassandra Johnson and Amy Burtaine.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, good to be here.
Well, what an honor it is to have the both of you here and to talk about this book. What a great read it is. Why don't you share with me, why don't we start with you, Michelle, what was the inspiration behind writing this book?
Well, of course, the honeybees and my relationship with them. I have been a beekeeper and a bee lover, actually, for much longer than I've had bees on my land. I began keeping bees in 2019, and now I have 5 hives. I started with 2. And Amy has been a bee lover, and she can share more about this for a long time, and we are best friends. And so, given our love for bees and one another, and our desire to share more about how bees model collective care, how they model different roles that we can play to practice collective care, and how they're in relationship with all parts of the ecosystem, we decided to write this love letter to them, this book, The Wisdom of the Hive. So that was the inspiration for me and for us.
Yeah, and I would add that I have been enchanted, as Michelle and I write, we are enchanted. I have been enchanted and captivated by bees probably my whole life, and I've dreamt of them. I've been fascinated every time I see them. When I see people working with them, I always wanted to learn more about that. So I always had this sort of draw towards the bees. And then I lived in Brazil in my early 20s and had a really incredible, informative experience of working with a neighbor who had 16 hives. And that was the first time that I really fell in love with tending bees and working with bees. But I've always been drawn to sort of their magic. And Michelle and I attended a phenomenal training where we just got so excited about, and it was about bee mysticism, and we just kept thinking there's so many metaphors and ways that the bees show up in the world that would be so valuable for humankind to learn from and do. So we thought we wanted to share what we've learned with people in hopes that we can all create a world where we act more like the bees.
Well, what a profound way of looking at life. And I know the book is opened with a profound experience about a queenless hive. How did that moment shift your understanding of community and care?
I love this question because that hive sting lived here for 4 years, and they lived up to their name. They were pretty spicy, and they taught me so much because I was in relationship with them for several years. And the experience you're referencing is, their attempts to try to tell me that they were queenless. And looking back, it was so obvious, but I was a new beekeeper, so I didn't understand until the day when I was standing in the bee yard and hundreds of bees were flying around my head, panicking. And I just realized, oh, they don't have a queen. I need to go get a queen for them because honeybee hives cannot survive without a queen because the queen is the only bee that lays eggs. And so for me, that taught me some about what it means to listen, right? And to listen to a being from the more than human world who's not going to communicate with me using words, but is using sound and asking me to tune and watch and observe. It's just I was so new that I didn't really know what to look for. But they're, panicky movements and their high pitched buzz let me know what was going on. Finally, I got it. And so it taught me about listening. It taught me about connection. It taught me about what actually allows a hive or a collective to be in harmony. They knew they would not be able to survive without the queen because that's what they need to survive. And providing that right away allowed the pitch, the tone of their pitch to shift and more harmony to happen within the hive. And, something that feels connected to this is that bees work in service of the hive. They do not think of themselves as individuals. They think of themselves as an extension of the hive. And their life cycle typically is about 6 weeks. In the winter, it can be a little bit longer because they have to survive the winter and get the hive through until the expansion of spring happens. And I love to think about how they are laboring for future generations and how they're bringing resources into the hive to provide care and sustenance for generations that they may never see because of how brief their life cycle is. So those are some of the lessons that I have learned from that experience with Sting and the need for a queen because that was the crux of their survival.
What a profound experience. And so, Amy, this kind of has me thinking. I mean, in your book, you suggest that the honeybees are not just they're not just in need of saving, but maybe they're here to help save us too. So, can you explain what that means?
Yeah, I think I was thinking when Michelle was just talking, we understand that the bees are a super organism, and that means that they have like a collective consciousness, right? It's very different than, we humans, and certainly humans in the West, right, who've been trained to be very individualized, right? That it's all about us or the individual, or you can make it on your own, which we know isn't true. Like, one of the biggest lessons that we feel the bees teach is that we need to be in communication, in alignment, in attunement with one another, in care, in sweetness with one another, in order to survive, right? We need to work together for the good of the whole, for the good of the commons, in order to survive, the things that we are facing, but also the things we've created, like climate change and, right, all of the shifts that are happening on the planet right now. And we really love that the bees, they don't do anything that would harm the hive. They just don't, right? Like, they work together to protect the hive, to protect the queen, to heal the hive, but they would never knowingly do anything to harm their collective. And I think that is part of what we feel like. Again, if human beings could model the bees, if we could act more like them, where we were really in tune with one another, where what we did was only out of care for one another, if we were very thoughtful about, we're not going to do that because that's going to harm the environment or harm one another. We think that is the part where we're acting in that way could help us save ourselves and the environment, right? And the more than human world that depends on our stewarding the environment. We also talk in the book about how, systems of oppression across human history, right, have really meant to divide and conquer people, like to keep us separate, to keep us isolated, to keep us fighting, to keep us thinking we're different. And that is part of, how that operates, right? And we want and understand that in order to make a shift, we have to really leave those ways behind and work in mutual care for the good of the whole. And that's where we feel like the bees, in their modeling, can save us. It's not just about us saving them, which we really should because they pollinate most of our food, right? We need them, but they actually don't need us, but we need them for more than just food.
Oh, in so many ways. And I love how your book, and we won't go into all of that, but how your book really dives into just that importance as connection. One of the things you also talk about is dream with bees. What does that mean and what does that look like?
Yeah, I want to just add something to what was just shared about saving the bees, and I'll talk about dreaming with the bees, and they're not disconnected. But part of what we're flipping on its head is this idea that humans are more important than the more than human world. And, there's this hierarchy of human to earth as if we're not part of the earth, right? As if we don't come from the earth, as if earth is not part of us. So I want to add that layer that it's near the beginning of the book, this idea and the thread is weaved throughout that what can we learn from the bees, not just because we love them and want to learn from them, but because we're in deep relationship with them and are not more important than them or any other part of the ecosystem or the various ecologies that are present, seen to us and unseen. Dreaming with bees, there are different practices, and Amy mentioned that she has had dreams about bees, and my bees definitely communicate with me through dreams. This is connected to bees being what are called psychopomps, and psychopomps are energies, animals, archetypes, deities that work between realms. And what this means is that bees are said to be here on Earth. And if you've ever watched a bee leave a hive, they ascend and go up very high. And there's a point when I can't see them anymore, right? It's almost as if they disappear. And then they come back into focus when they're coming close to the hive. And so the idea is that they're here on Earth working within this realm for healing, but also work and traditionally, psychopomps are thought of helping people's souls, once they've departed or left the body, transition to the above. Bees can work with the above, they can work with the here and now, they can work within the below, however people might think of that. They're not just what we see if we're observing them in front of a hive or if we're watching a video of the bees, that there's something going on that's deeper and there's mysticism around them. And this connects to dreaming because dreaming allows us to be in a more liminal space where we are, yes, still present in our body as on Earth, right? But we're also journeying and traveling somewhere. And the intention with dreaming with bees is for us to journey with bees to gather some information that we might need to bring back during dream time, right? That we might need to bring back into our waking life. The bees also send messages. I've received messages from my bees during dream time about their transition. Actually, I lost 2 hives 2 winters ago, and I had a dream about them 2 nights before I realized that they were no longer alive. It got very cold, unseasonably cold here, and in the dream, they vanished all of a sudden. I've also had dreams about my bees that give me information about what's going on in their hives. So dreaming with the bees can be very literal in the sense of messages you might receive about bees or the more than human world, or you can also engage bees as dream allies to travel with you during dream time since they are adept at traversing different realms.
So, with that in mind, and Amy, maybe you can help us with this one. How does bee behavior offer guidance for navigating personal and collective trauma?
I think back to that notion of care. Number one, in a bee's life cycle, they play all the parts other than the queen, right? So they start as nurse bees, and later they're worker bees, and later they're out foraging and collecting nectar, right? And later they're cleaning the hive. Like they're doing all these different times in these different things in their work in their life cycle. And so I think, again, I think back to so much of our trauma is again from family systems, from systems of oppression, so much from the ways in which we as human beings do not care for one another and treat one another cruelly. And also this notion of othering and a notion of like, well, you're not good enough because I do this and you only do that, right? Like what I love about the bees is everybody does everything eventually, right? And for the collective, and it's all about care, right? So in a bee's life cycle, they will have fed the brood. They will have cared for the young bees. They will have gone out to feed the hive. They will have been undertakers and taken the dead out of the hive. Like all the many parts of the life cycle that I think are really essential to a life, right? And I think when we engage in all aspects, not just as specialists in one thing, but in sort of the larger picture, we can attune to and attend to one another's hurt and harm more acutely and more sweetly and more in more healing ways. I think that's one of the things that happens, and I'd love to hear Michelle's thoughts on this as well, because Michelle thinks has done a lot of work on trauma and grief.
But thanks, Amy. There are two things that come to mind about this, and I also love this question. I'm aware that, and there's some controversy about this, but I'm aware that there are beekeepers who are losing their hives because of climate chaos, and that there's what's called colony collapse. And then there's some contradictory information saying there are more bees than ever. They're on the rise. I want to say the beekeepers that I'm in relationship with are not necessarily having that experience, and the bees are not able to adapt as rapidly as they need to the conditions that we've created as humans, and the ways in which we have affected the climate negatively, and the way the planet is inflamed because of our behavior. Like, we're asking an ecosystem, the more than human world, to adapt. And I'm present to the practice, which is called telling the bees. It's an ancient practice, and it began with sitting with the honeybee hives and engaging in some ritual around this. Sometimes they would, cover a hive with black crepe paper. Sometimes they would turn a hive to face the north. Typically, they face the south. They get the most sun that way. But if there had been a loss, if the beekeeper had died, if someone in the family had died, that there was this ritual and ceremony that needed to be done with the bees, that we actually needed to be in relationship with the bees to tell them where we were feeling and how we were feeling heartbreak so that they could mourn with us. They are very present to trauma and mourning. And I name this because they're aware of how they're being asked to adapt. And they are aware of colony collapse, and they are aware of every part of the ecosystem, the sun, the water, the flowers, the nectar, the pollen, and how conditions are shifting. And I think we can learn a lot from both practicing being in relationship with them and saying, this is where my heartbreak is, right? Partnering with them in that. I also think we can change our ways so that we can better support the more than human world. And I think we can observe how they respond amid chaos, amid trauma, amid grief. I sit with my bees and I tell them about my heartbreak all of the time. And what I observe is them continuing to do their work. They're continuing to bring in pollen. They're continuing to bring in nectar. They're continuing to tend the hive, even as things are falling apart. And I think there's a lesson in this for us, right? How do we continue to show up as best we can in these moments when it feels like everything is unraveling or falling apart, right? Things are coming undone. And who do we partner with to hold our grief and to grieve with us? So that's what I would add about the bees. I think they're well aware of trauma and grief because they're experiencing it on a collective scale, just as we are. And the way that we're grieving and what we're grieving isn't that separate, right? It isn't that different. So that's what I would add to what Amy shared.
Well, thank you for taking the time to elaborate on that. And one of the things that I'd like to touch on is attunement as a healing practice. How does this all correlate?
I would love to say, because I just was thinking when Michelle was talking about the hum of the hive, right? Like sound is a very powerful method of communication, and it's an energetic and vibrational communication. And so one thing I was thinking, even in terms of the conversation we were just having on trauma, is a lot of what Michelle and I write about in the book is nervous system regulation, right? That we as humans need to constantly work to regulate our nervous systems, especially at times like this. And one of the most profound ways to do that is to hum, right? Like humming, it both sort of vibrates the body, but it also sort of in a sound wave, it creates healing energies. And it can also sort of break up things that are stuck, right? That sort of vibration of like a tuning fork or the movement of sound can break up things that are stuck. And so I think about humming as a practice both for trauma and to regulate the nervous system. We can hum individually, we can hum together, we can listen to bees and hum along to a YouTube video of the hive. It's very soothing. And the attunement piece is really the critical piece of, in terms of the nervous system. How do I attune to my own heart, my own spirit, my own self? How do I, as Michelle said, listen and quiet down enough that I can attune and go inward to my own system and my own body and be embodied? And then, once I have, and these are not linear, these are all at the same time, but not only do I need to attune to myself, but I need to then be able to attune to you, Marianne, or you, Michelle, like individually or across relationships, right? How do we, because we do constantly feel the energy of other people, and how do we allow that awareness that we have as social beings to help us be part of the holding and the healing of others? And then how do we attune in groups, right? Which is something that we don't do. Michelle and I do this in workshops. We do it right together with folks that are sort of consciously craving these experiences. But as a whole, we are not working to attune to the human collective or attune to the environment, where we vibrate together, where we try and listen and quiet and hear the messages that we can when we are vibrationally aligned with other beings and other people. And so we think it's a really critical skill that we have to learn together to build our individual ability to attune and calm our nervous systems, but our collective ability to work together and attune to one another.
I sit with my bees as much as I can when I'm home and not traveling. And I am thinking about vibration and the hum of the hive and how it mirrors our own vibration. And often people say it sounds like the universal sound of Om. For anyone who's listening who may have ohmed or heard that sound, the seed sound, the first sound of the universe, as some people say, depending on their lineage, and how tuning into that is a way that, to Amy's point, we reconnect with the truth of who we are, and then the truth that is present within all through that sound. And Amy mentioned how regulating the hum is for the nervous system. It's medicinal, I would say, the sound, the hum, when there's harmony within the hive or harmony around the hives. So if people need that nervous system regulation, you can listen to, even if you're not in direct relationship with a hive, you can listen to the sound, the hum. You can hum along with the hive, which I do quite often, to connect in that way and to remember. That's what I'd add.
I think that's so beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. What are some of the surprising behaviors or facts about honeybees that change the way that you live?
One fact is, there's so much, but the one that popped up first is, Amy mentioned they play different roles within their superorganism. And I found out from one of my teachers that they can actually, and it makes sense, change roles, meaning they can revert back. So there's their life cycle and the different roles they move through. The first role that they play is as a nurse bee. They clean out their cell once they emerge, once they come out into the hive, and they clean out their cell, and they can't really fly well yet. And so they become a nurse bee. And the final stage of their life cycle, during that stage, they are foragers. And so they're gathering resources for the hive. They go out of the hive, they bring resources, pollen, nectar, tree resin, water back into the hive. as worker bees. And if the hive needs more of something, so they need more bees to build honeycomb, or they need more nurse bees because there's more brood, or something's going on and they need more undertakers in the hive, or they need more attendants for the queen, they can actually revert back to a previous role. And I love that because it means they can do what's required for the good of the hive, which I think is such a central thread and theme in our book. Right? What do we need to do at this time, and what can we learn from them? And adapting and adjusting and paying attention to, particularly through the practice of attunement, what's needed, right, and what is present, we can actually respond in right relationship and within the right role to meet the moment. So that's the fact that I will share. I'm sure Amy has one she'll share as well, or several.
I am just, I wish I could call up we wrote about these things in the book and I can't always call up the facts in my mind, but 1 in every 3 bites of food we eat is pollinated by bees. Bees fly miles and miles to make, small amounts of honey. They collect so much, there's a ratio that is astounding, right? Of work to what is produced and sweetness that I think to me was astounding and surprising. And I think goes back to what Michelle was saying, that the work of the hive is a work of love. It's not just, it is survival, but it's more than that. And to me, it feels like love. I think that's what I want to say. And I want to offer that, for those folks listening, a lot of people are afraid of bees, right? Understandably, it hurts if you get stung. But we want to say that you don't have to be a bee tender or a bee keeper to pick up and understand the lessons that bees have to offer us. And one of the easiest ways, entry points for folks, and I think about this as a foodie, as someone who loves food, is most people are familiar with the bees because of honey, right? Thousands and thousands of years, human beings have depended on honey, decided and loved honey, went after honey. And so most of us have tasted honey. And so that sort of brings me to the piece of, even if you are not in direct relationship with the bees, we are all craving sweetness in our lives, especially because life is hard, right? And being a human person is hard. And one of the things I think that Michelle and I really want folks to do is to allow yourself to experience the sweetness that life offers when it's available, but also to offer your sweetness to others. What sweetness do you have to offer to your friends, yourself, your family, your collective, your community? What sweetness and what medicine can you bring? So that's just another metaphor that I'm sort of sitting with at the moment.
Well, Michelle and Amy, you both are such an inspiration. Where can our listeners connect with you and be part of your communities and learn more about your work?
Yes, thank you again, Marianne, for having us. People can find me at michellcjohnson.com. There is a books tab there with all of the books that I've written, The Wisdom of the Hive being the latest. And there are also several events listed on the workshops and trainings page. There are many online and some in-person events coming up focused on the wisdom of the hive. So we'd love for people to join us. We have a virtual book club coming up. And there are several other things there. So people can find me there and also on social media, in particular Instagram. My handle is @skillinaction.
And I'm not as plugged in as Michelle is. It's just an excellent network online. I have a website, amyburtaine.com, and I'm also on Instagram @radicalcackle. But also all of our things are listed on Michelle's website. So if folks want to find out where we'll be and who we're talking to, certainly go there.
Well, Michelle and Amy, thank you both so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Thank you, Mary. A pleasure.
The Wisdom of the Hive is available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all indie retailers. And remember, support our indie bookstores. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne, where we make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.